Hello, Avila Advantage students. We're now in week 7 of Microeconomics. So we only have 2 weeks left, so everybody keep plugging along. You're doing a good job. This week we're going to look at chapter 13 and 15. So you have those readings. You also have a forum discussion. You'll have your homework assignment, the weekly quiz, and also the second part of your paper, the company analysis 2, is due. So make sure to start on that early and have that ready to go by Sunday in the evening to get that submitted. So, and again, jump into that forum discussion early. So this is a little bit busier week, so try to get that done early so you can focus on the other items towards the end of the week. With our goals this week, or learning objectives, last week we had talked about negative externalities. This week we're going to be positive and look at such things that actually benefit. As your textbook readings will talk about, there could be private benefits such as profits, but there are also social benefits. And the textbook gave a lot of good examples. It could be vaccinations, education, but many times that the ideal level of output in the economy, or what they have like the marginal social benefit, is greater than the marginal private benefit. It perhaps doesn't reach that unless there's maybe some government intervention or some incentives. So that is what this chapter is talking about, is how can you go about and get people to respond to incentives, and that can be related to research and development, because we all get benefits, social benefits, from research and development through private goods that spill over in our economy. And just as we talked about water last week in the forum discussion, we want to make sure we have clean water, and hopefully whatever research we find out are ways to prevent incidents that can be shared with other cities. That's a positive externality. I mean, your employers, for the most part, view you getting a college education as a positive externality. You can bring things that add value back to the work environment from what you learn in the classroom. So things I can think of recently too now relative to this is even like the Zika virus. It really would behoove us to cooperate together to try to figure out vaccinations or how to prevent this disease from spreading, especially with the Olympics going on in Brazil this year. If that's brought to other parts of the world, that could have a negative economic, social impact. So we should really cooperate together. But sometimes it's hard to stomach to spend money on this because people don't see the immediate value. And that's what you have to do in the government, is try to convince people that we need to do this now, as opposed to waiting till later. There may be a greater problem. All right. They mentioned this, ways to provide some incentives. They talk about intellectual property in your text. The government can spend money on R&D. You can give tax breaks to encourage R&D, or there can be some kind of cooperative research, like through states or education. We experienced a lot of grants. Avila's even given grants to try to promote education, different sectors of education. But last thing they wrap up in this chapter is the concept of a public good. Examples of public goods to me are national defense or a police station that protects the area. They mentioned 2 terms in order to be a public good that is not excludable. So even if you don't pay taxes, you're still protected by the U.S. military. And then it's also non-rivalous, that by you consuming the good doesn't impact the consumption of someone else. Like if I consume a cheeseburger, that's going to be rivalous because some other person cannot consume that. But with public goods such as national parks, anyone can use it, and we can't prevent others from using it too. One of the concerns, though, too, is the textbook mentioned, is the tragedy of commons, that if there are places like the ocean that it's very hard to regulate and prevent people from fishing, some of those natural resources or public goods may be overused. And in fact, I think I remember reading an article last week about a certain type of fish that's being sold in China for, I believe, medicinal purposes or anti-aging effects. Well, that fish is pretty much facing extinction now because it can go on the black market for almost $100,000. So we have to figure out ways to try to prevent people from using all our natural resources. Otherwise, we're not going to have enough for everyone to go around down the road. Okay. Last thing is mentioned in chapter 15, some things I want to make sure to review. We look at your introduction to labor, and what you'll read there first is a lot of different labor laws. I remember when I turned 40, I jokingly said to my class that now I'm protected from the anti-age discrimination law. So it was a law established, probably back in the 60s, but there's a lot of different laws. I want you to read through them. You'll be familiar with a lot of them. But some of the main things they start off with this chapter is the concept of unions. The economists don't necessarily have one opinion. Well, they do have opinions, but they're not necessarily going to say that unions are good or bad. They just make more observations about unions. And the one thing you probably could argue from an economic standpoint is that you are in a union, that's probably good for you because you're probably going to have a higher equilibrium wage than that would exist in the market. So if you look at union membership, it's somewhat declining right now. I know recently in the news there was some with the Verizon workers, I think in the East Coast, just one kind of a union battle, if you will, with the Verizon telephone company. And internationally, if you look at places like France, they're still having some kind of difficulties because even in their country, some of the unions, it may make it very hard that if someone doesn't do a good job, to actually have to let that person go. So they're very reluctant to hire people, and thus you have much higher unemployment rates in those nations. Difficult challenges to talk about, what is the best practice, or how does the American government get involved with unions, but it's something that is constantly changing, adapting in the modern economy, especially even just how business is done, how business models are changing. You think about a business model like Uber or Airbnb, where things are pretty much outsourced, and it's really kind of like the creative destruction, changing the way that we do things in the business world. Discussion with employment discrimination. In my mind, when I think of employment discrimination, it can happen by three different types. One is just first by the individual person. If you have a very sourpuss personality, or not very pleasant, you're probably not going to be hired as a waiter or a server. Okay, so and that's perfectly legal. Another type might be just simply by group. If it's viewed that a certain group of workers, maybe teenage workers, are not as reliable, they may not be hired. Okay, and the third type, which is illegal, is those based on sex, race, religion. Those are the ones that we have laws set up to try to protect against those things. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Now, there are sometimes there are in business situations what we might call like economic discrimination. If I wanted to get a job at Hooters, I could apply to be a server at Hooters, but I doubt you would want to see your professor in that outfit. So the firm can argue that there are certain reasons why we have to hire certain types of workers because this is what our customers are wanting. But you have to be able to defend that, and that's a tough thing to do. I know in the news in the past decade, Abercrombie and Fitch has gotten in trouble in the claims that they were only hiring certain types of workers and were discriminatory in their practices about who they would hire too. Last part is immigration. And this is a hotly debated topic right now in politics too. Economists look at both the positive and negative impacts of immigration. The authors of your textbook share some of those positive and negative impacts, but it is something that we have to deal with. And in Europe, they're dealing with mass exodus of people from Syria, and the countries are really having a hard time grappling about such a rapid change in immigration. What is the right thing to do? What is the just thing to do? And what is fair. And there's been policy attempts to make changes, but not a lot of reform has happened. And I think that's maybe some of the frustration you're seeing in the political arena right now is, what do we do about immigration? What is the right thing to do? Okay. Well, do email me if you have any questions, but otherwise have a great week. As I said, we're getting closer to the end of the course. Everybody's doing a great job. But look forward to talking to you online. Have a great week.